join me for the reading of Psalm 130, verses 1 through 8. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, Lord, who could stand? But there is forgiveness with you, so that you may be revered. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord, more than those who watch for the morning, more than those who watch for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is great power to redeem. It is he who will redeem Israel from all its iniquities. The second reading is from Matthew 24, verses 36 through 44. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore. You do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake. He would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour.
Good morning, Norfield. Would you join me in prayer? We confess, O God, we are not very good at waiting. Yet your eternal message to us is to wait and to watch and to hope with anticipation and expectation. Amen. On the occasion of our 36th wedding anniversary on November 15th, Nareda and I celebrated in New York City. Now, I can't let our 36 years of being married pass without saying that in the 36 years of being married, Nareda and I have never had a single argument. They've all been doubles. Nareda and I had tickets, a gift of our children, Daniel and Crystal, to see the Carole King musical, Beautiful. And after taking our seats, we waited with bated breaths for this Broadway play to begin. Here is how one of my favorite preachers, Frederick Buechner, describes this particular moment of theater. Buechner says the house lights go off and the footlights come on. Even the chattiest stop chattering as they wait in darkness for the curtain to rise. In the orchestra pit, the violin bows are poised. The conductor has raised his baton, and in the silence there is a sound so faint that for all you can tell, it may be only the sound of silence itself. And you hold your breath, expectantly to listen, and you are aware of the beating of your own heart. And the extraordinary thing that is about to happen is matched only by the extraordinary moment just before it happens. That's Advent. Advent is the name of that extraordinary before it happens moment. Advent, when the nights come early and the winds blow cold, and we put on wool socks and long johns and heavy sweaters. Advent, when we turn up the heat, put another log on the fire, and put extra lights on outside, not only because they look pretty, but because they seem to hold the night back for just a bit. Advent, when we put on a few extra pounds and put more debt on our credit cards than we ought. When we put on fancy clothing, go to holiday parties, and put out our best guest dishes. But Advent calls us to wait. While others are already geared up for the holiday festivities, as Christians, Advent calls us to wait. Of course, like everyone else, we want to haul out the holly, put up the tree and the brightest strings of light you've ever seen. We too want to hang some tinsel on the evergreen bough, put candles in the windows, carols at the spinet right this very minute, and even though it hasn't snowed a single flurry, we too are in a hurry because we can't wait. We want Christmas now. But Advent calls us to wait. And that is why Kathy Huey, the United Church of Christ chaplain of the Amistad Chapel in Cleveland, says Advent is the hardest of times for faithful Christians. Because as people of faith, Advent calls us to hold off on this celebrating for 4 more weeks. Advent calls us to wait and to embrace the cold, dark silence before we put on the carols of Christmas. Advent calls us to wait. The late great philosopher Dr. Seuss, in his book, All the Places You'll Go, says there's a place called waiting. And the waiting place, he says, is the place for people, well, just waiting. Waiting for a train to go or a bus to come, or a plane to go or the mail to come, or the rain to go or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no. Waiting for the snow to melt, waiting for the rain to stop, waiting for the paint to dry, waiting to be heard, waiting to be understood, waiting to change in some way or another, or waiting for those we love to change so that we can tolerate them a little longer. In Ann Tyler's novel, The Amateur Marriage, we witness a couple, Michael and Pauline, waiting. Michael and Pauline are sweethearts who get married and have 3 children. But one day, their oldest child, Lindy, runs away from home. Lindy just disappears. For the first days, weeks, and even months, Michael and Pauline watch and they wait for Lindy to return. They seize on any and every clue as to her whereabouts. They pace, they peer out windows, they listen for a key scratching at the front door's lock. They sit bolt upright in bed each time they think they hear footsteps on the driveway. But Lindy does not return. And over the years, her absence becomes the norm, just another part of their lives. They give up on the idea of seeing Lindy ever again. They stop waiting and watching expectantly for her to return. At first, they were certain she would return, and return soon. And they would not have been at all surprised had Lindy walked back through that front door and back into their lives. But after years of waiting, the surprise flips. And now they would be surprised if Lindy does come back. In our text from Matthew's Gospel, Jesus is preparing the disciples for the wait, saying about his return, about that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, only God. And Jesus didn't say the waiting would be easy. But what he does say is that we need to wait and to be prepared for the long wait and to keep the faith while we wait. I know, that's easier said than done. When you've got at least some idea of the year, the month, the day, the hour of something happening, something coming, you can wait patiently or impatiently with expectancy, but you wait. But when you have no idea when or even if something is going to happen, waiting becomes agonizing, unbearable. And Advent calls for us to wait in that difficult state of being. Advent is the waiting place. And all of us have been called to spend more time than we want in that waiting place. But waiting is part of living. I recall leaving for my 6-month deployment on the USS Detroit on my son's Daniel's first birthday. Narrator and I didn't know what to expect that first deployment or even know how to wait. Halfway through the deployment, a group of wives, including Narrator, flew to Toulon, France, where the Detroit was going to be docked for about 3 weeks. Narrator and I spent 2 glorious weeks in Barcelona, Spain, and we had the time of our lives. But when those 2 weeks were up, and we had to say goodbye for another 3 months, our patience with waiting was over. All of us have been called to spend more time than we want in the waiting place. And waiting is tough for us because we experience time waiting as time wasted. You know, whenever I provide premarital counseling for couples preparing for their wedding day, I always caution them not to miss out on the joy that should be part of preparing for their wedding day, so that while they are waiting for their wedding day to arrive, they should wait with joyful expectation. And I caution them not to become so irritated in waiting that they miss the preciousness in the waiting moments for their wedding day. We are in Advent, and in Advent we are waiting for a baby to be born who will change our world and our lives. Unfortunately, we've made Advent so much about Christmas Day until when Christmas Day finally arrives, it's anticlimactic. Christmas Day never lives up to its advanced billing. We've waited year after year for Christmas Day to come, and when it does, nothing changes. All is not calm and all is not bright. Christmas comes and there is no peace on earth, no goodwill among people, and God and sinners are not reconciled. So except for the very young, our waiting seems to be in vain, without merit. Christmas Day ends up being like every other day before it and every other year before that. And when you've waited for something to change, something to happen, and it does not, after a while you don't expect anything to happen. Your waiting becomes in vain, and yet Advent calls us to wait. But ours is not a culture comfortable with waiting. We've been pushed ever faster in our desire to just hurry up by the advances of technology. But whatever technology has done to our culture, the ways of God have not changed. God still says, "Be still and know that I am God." Advent calls us to be still, to be sober, because what Advent does is to prepare us for God's greatest event, God's coming into our world as a child born in a stable in Bethlehem at Christmas. Advent is like the hush in a theater, just before the curtain rises. Advent means something is coming, and the promise of Advent is that what is coming is an unimaginable invasion, an explosion on a starry night, as God's new Genesis, God's new beginning, begins through Mary and Joseph and a baby named Jesus. It all begins anew, because the waiting place is really an incubator, a place of preparation before revelation and proclamation. And Advent is a reminder that everything worthwhile needs incubating. My sisters and brothers, this Advent, we are waiting for the inauguration of a new president. And as people of faith, we wait, hoping and praying that our new president and his new administration will help us make our nation and our world a better place. Because we know that nothing worthwhile comes without preparation. Nothing worthwhile can be born outside the waiting place. And so it is in the stillness and the darkness of Advent that we, like Mary, yield to being God bearers in our world. And in this stillness, we commit to being Christ's presence in the world, to become the flesh of faith, the unfolding of the incarnation. And as Rabbi Friedman quoted me last week saying, we are called to tangibilitate the gospel, to tangibilitate God's grace and love in our world. The Bible reminds us that when the time had fully come, God sent Jesus. In other words, we had to wait for God to get the world ready. And in Advent, we wait for God to get us ready. So we need Advent to make us ready for this coming. In a season of Christmas parties and Christmas shopping, we need a time of stillness and soberness and waiting. In a world that says, as the rabbit said in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, I'm late for an important date. I have no time to say hello. I'm late. Advent calls us to wait. And this waiting not only prepares us for the birth of God in the flesh, it prepares every heart to make room in their lives to receive the one born the King of Angels. I want to pause here for a moment to speak to something that many in the United States and in Cuba have waited for the past almost 60 years, and that's the death of Cuban President Fidel Castro. Many of you know that hanging in my office is a picture of myself shaking hands with Fidel Castro. This is a picture of Fidel Castro as he's coming into Riverside Church in New York City for what would be a long 7-hour speech that captivated the crowd to the very end. Norfield, I had the real privilege of going to Cuba during the situation involving 6-year-old Elian Gonzalez, who was the focus of so much attention between Cuba, Cuban families in Florida, and our nation right at the turn of the 21st century. I was a member of the delegation of the National Council of Churches to Cuba, and while there I met with Cuban officials, nationalists, our U.S. representative to Cuba, and everyday ordinary Cuban people to learn as much as I could about how they viewed us, and I had the opportunity to share with them how some Americans view them. And I was persuaded by my trip to Cuba and President Castro's coming to the Riverside Church in New York City to never, ever let anyone tell me what to think of others, but to learn about others for myself. It was an eye-opening, life-changing event for me because I so vividly recall how angry we were as a nation when Cuba became a communist nation. I so recall my elementary school classmates discussing the Cuban Missile Crisis and how certain we were that the United States would obliterate both Cuba and the Soviet Union if we had to go to war. But what did I know? I was only 10 years old. But I also recall Fidel Castro coming to the United States in 1962 and our attempt to assassinate President Castro at the Waldorf Astoria. But Fidel Castro, landing at Kennedy Airport, refused to go to the Waldorf Astoria where death awaited him, and chose instead to stay at the Teresa Hotel in Harlem on 125th Street, just 5 blocks from where I lived and grew up, and where no sane head of state would ever choose to stay. Say what you will about Fidel Castro, but for some in Cuba, some waited for a long time for the changes he brought to their lives. I want to say this morning our condolences to the Cuban people. My sisters and brothers, without the waiting place, we are not prepared for the future God has in store for us. And so I say to you on this, the first Sunday in Advent, welcome to Advent, God's waiting place, God's incubator, God's place of preparation, readiness, and hope. Because in the waiting place, how we see life is altered, modified, transformed, revolutionized, and confirmed that it's time to do nothing but wait. The waiting place confirms that someone, somewhere, loves us enough to make all things new. My sisters and brothers, this is our first Sunday in Advent. There are more to come. Amen.